One of the devices that composers use to achieve unity in tonal music is what's called a sequence. A sequence is simply where you take some sort of recognizable pattern, like this pattern you have right here. In this case is starting on C, rises to D, E, jumps back to C, and then it repeats that pattern except starting on a different pitch class. So in this case, it goes from C, D, the same pattern, rising and then leaping down back to that starting pitch and moving up by step, etc., until the line completes according to what the composer wants to do. Now, this sort of repetition is very important in music to achieve that unity, but the thing to remember about a sequence is that a sequence will happen in a single voice. Okay, so you'll notice in this example, you have this sequence happening in the treble voice and the same sequence happening in the bass voice, obviously down an octave. Now, each voice, the treble voice, has a sequence, and so does the bass voice. But the bass voice is not a sequence of the treble voice. The bass voice is imitating, it's an imitation of the treble voice. So there may be a sequence happening in here, but the entire bass voice that's repeating this treble voice line is not considered a sequence. So the sequence is happening, but this is an imitation of the treble voice. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like, starting right from the beginning.
A monophonic texture, we're talking about something with a single melody and nothing else, like Gregorian chant. In this case, the melody is like a string. You can see the shape, but that's it. It's a little one-dimensional. We could add some accompaniment though, say by adding a band behind the lead singer. This is the texture you're probably the most familiar with because it has been the most popular texture in music since it was applied to the first operas in the early 1600s, though there's no telling how far back it actually goes. If monophonic texture is a string, this texture, called homophonic, is a sheet. We still have the shape of the string providing the structure, and the melody is independent enough that you can sing it on its own without your audience batting an eye, but it feels filled out by the rest of the fabric underneath it. However, in the Western tradition, there's another texture that goes further back that works entirely differently. If you tried to pick a melody out of Renaissance church music, you would probably have some trouble choosing which one to sing. That's because it's what we call polyphonic. If monophony is a string, then polyphony is more like a braid. Each part is equally important, and the experience comes from hearing them interplay as they respond to each other and trade off moments of prominence. But when we're dealing with classical music of the 17th century through modern times, it's not always so clear-cut. Most pieces you hear will have a mix of all of the textures, and in the way that a cable knit scarf is kind of a piece of fabric, but also kind of a braid, you can interpret any given moment in a number of ways. Take the finale of Beethoven's Third Symphony, for instance. It's kind of generally a theme in variations, like we discussed in the video on binary form, and it starts off presenting the main theme monophonically with pizzicato strings. The first variation, however, is much more polyphonic with an interesting call and response between the low and high strings. By the time we get to the fourth variation, we have homophony, with the melody in the oboe and the rest of the orchestra just accompanying it.